Good morning, everyone. It has been a year of unprecedented crises because of Joe Biden and House Democrats' failed leadership. The American people do not trust Joe Biden, and time after time, with every issue he touches, he makes the problems facing American families worse, exacerbating all of these crises that our constituents are forced to bear. And his sinking poll numbers from the start of this year to today are proof of that. Due to the Democrats' reckless tax and spend policies and their unconstitutional mandates, hardworking families are struggling under the skyrocketing cost of groceries and basic goods due to inflation and the empty shelves in local stores across America. Port congestion is getting worse, which means not only gifts for family and friends are sitting on boats, but the backlog is hurting our small businesses that are trying to get their products to market during the busiest season of the year. We call this Joe Biden's holidays. I've seen firsthand how this is impacting families in my district and small businesses in the North Country. Another crisis that Democrats continue to ignore is the crisis at our southern border. Since Joe Biden became president, we've had over 1.6 million encounters at the southern border. And with this surge at our border, there's an unthinkable amount of fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances pouring into communities, enough to kill every American 7 times over. Think about that. Enough fentanyl to kill every American 7 times over. Here to talk about what Republicans are doing, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues Bob Latta and Morgan Griffith. You'll first hear from Bob Latta from Ohio. Bob?
Thank you. Thanks, Elise. And thank you all very much. You know, the Centers for Disease Control reported that in the United States in a 12-month period ending in April 2021, there were over 100,000 drug overdoses, with 2/3 of these caused by synthetic opioids. During the same period, there were over 5,585 drug overdose deaths in my home state of Ohio. 5,585 lives lost. The influx of overdoses can be directly attributed to the isolation due to the pandemic, and as Elise mentioned, our crisis at the southern border. From October 2020 to September 2021, the Customs and Border Patrol seized 11,201 pounds of fentanyl. Now, the important thing to remember is that's what the Customs and Border Patrol were able to seize. We don't know how much more got across the border. And as was said, that's enough to kill 2.5 billion people, or the entire U.S. population again, 7 times over. The cartels are to make small modifications to chemical compounding of fentanyl, making it harder for law enforcement to control. And fentanyl has become popular with illicit labs because it's cheaper and it's much easier to manufacture than heroin. It's more addicting and fatal than heroin. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. And if you ever go to the DEA website, you can look at the one picture that I showed across my district of a penny and just a small fleck, just a small little fleck of fentanyl, and that's as much as needed to be out there to kill you. And we know that's being laced into all other types of drugs. When I talk to my law enforcement and our prosecutors back in Ohio, I'm hearing from them talking about what's happening, and they're putting fentanyl into marijuana and other types of drugs. So it's making it much more stronger and much more dangerous. And it's heart-rending because I've had 2 different large events at the University of Findlay and Defiance College. And when we had these meetings and listening to the parents that have lost their children because of these drugs, we have to act. And when you look at these pictures today, from Kimberly, age 9, Alexander, 14, Devin, 19, Haley, 20, Daniel, 16, Zachary, 17, and Spencer, 20, it's time to act. And we have to get it done, and we got to do it now. So these are some of the faces of the fentanyl crisis that is wreaking havoc to our communities, and they deserve justice. And their families deserve justice. And that's why, as I said, we've got to act, and that's why we're working hard in the Energy and Commerce Committee on our side of the aisle to get something done. And at this time, I'd like to turn things over to my good friend, Morgan Griffith from Virginia.
Thanks, Bob. In 2020, my state of Virginia hit a tragic milestone. Fatal drug overdoses hit an all-time high of 2,309. Fentanyl and its analogs caused or contributed to 71.8% of those deaths. Statistics for this year indicate that 2021 may surpass that heartbreaking number of overdose deaths. We know that fentanyl-related substances are contributing to the surge in overdose deaths, but under current law, their temporary placement in Schedule 1 expires in February. Our bill that we're introducing today would make that scheduling permanent. But our bill doesn't stop there. It streamlines research on fentanyl analogs so that we can better understand the effects of these substances. At a recent hearing of the Subcommittee on Health, we heard testimony that there could be as many as 4,800 fentanyl analogs. We have data with our labs on fewer than 30 of those analogs. In other words, fewer than 1% of them. Now, our bill makes this permanent that they're Schedule 1. But then it also has a component that I feel very strongly about that says we're going to research. We're going to find out what we can so that we can then figure out whether there are some analogs that may be beneficial. The FDA's witness testified that they had 25 that they had examined. NIH has examined a few others. And of those 25, there were a couple of the analogs they found that were inert. They had one that had potential, needs more research, because it blocks the mu opioid receptor in the brain. And what that means is if we do the research, we keep it as a Schedule 1 until we find out that it has something positive. What that means is that that particular analog might actually block the receptors in the brain so that if somebody has gotten a hold of one of the other fentanyls that would cause a death, like Narcan, you might be able to put this in to the system and keep that person from dying. Now, you might say, well, why do we need to worry about this? There's only, you could list them as you find them to be dangerous. And the problem is that the Mexicans and the Chinese are cooking up these ingredients. And if we make a list, I think you mentioned this earlier, if we make a list and we only have certain items on the list, they're just going to find another analog that's just as deadly and just as powerful as the one that's already out there. Remember, we've looked at about 30. There's 4,800 of them. So what we need to do is we need to make this permanent. We need to make it clear that we're trying to protect lives in the United States. We need to make it clear that if you're bringing this stuff over and we catch you, you can't have the latest analog that you all have experimented with in your labs in Mexico and in China, and then bring that stuff in and think you're going to avoid the punishment of the American law. We need to do that. This is an extremely important bill. I'm really excited to be one of the leads on this because, one, we're protecting Americans, and two, we're promoting research. Because one of the things we've done in the past is we've put things on Schedule 1 and then we've not researched it. And there may be potential out there. It's got to be done carefully. It's got to be done and read the bill. It's got to be done in the way that we've set it up so we have the protections in there. But we may find something good as a part of the research. But until we find something good, it needs to be illegal. I'm now going to turn it over to our great whip, Steve Scalise, who's also a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Thanks, Steve.
Well, thank you, Morgan and Bob, for your important work on addressing this opioid crisis. And look, the opioid crisis is a direct result of President Biden's open borders. The border crisis has led to many other crises, but especially when we see this infusion of drugs coming across our southern border. Border Patrol agents will tell you it's a direct result of the open borders, but it's also made every community in America a border town now because the crisis at the border is affecting every community in America. There is not a district of all 435 House members that haven't been affected by deaths from opioids that are coming across the border. And when Elise talked about that important statistic, the devastating statistic that there are enough illegal drugs in our country now to kill every American 7 times, these are real numbers. These are real people that are dying in our communities. And President Biden needs to step up and secure our border. It's a national defense issue, but it's a life and death issue in communities all across America that he's allowing an open border that, among other things, is allowing all of these illegal drugs to come into our country and kill our young people at alarming numbers. I do want to point out something important that happened last night, and that was the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act. Maybe one of those rare moments in these days where Congress came together, Republicans and Democrats, to make sure we're taking care of our men and women in uniform. The bill had important victories. I want to applaud Mike Rogers, our ranking member, for helping secure some of those important wins, including a pay raise for our troops that's much needed, especially in these days of high inflation. It affects our men and women in uniform, and there was a pay raise for our troops that was included in that bill, along with some other important victories. So, it gets lost a lot of times when we're having these big battles over big issues, that we were able to come together last night for our men and women in uniform. I wish we were able to have some of those same kind of bipartisan efforts on some of the other crises that are facing our country. Unfortunately, Speaker Pelosi will not work with Republicans to address the inflation crisis that's causing the cost of goods for so many things as families are trying to shop for the holidays. If they can even find the gifts that they're looking for their loved ones, they're paying dramatically more for it when they go to the grocery store. They're paying 20% or more for the food that they're buying. We all know the problem with the gasoline and energy crisis, where you're paying maybe 60% more for gasoline, and many families can't even afford to fill up their tank because the price is so high. President Biden has created these crises, and it's affecting hardworking families all across the country. Congress needs to be dealing with these crises, and it's a shame that Speaker Pelosi won't bring any bills to the floor to address those many crises. In fact, they're going in the opposite direction by continuing to bring bills to spend trillions more dollars, as we saw with the bill last week, to continue raising taxes and spending more money that is driving inflation even higher. So with that, be happy to open it up to a few questions. Chad.
Good morning. Thank you. Obviously, there are some Republicans who are concerned about this question of handling the debt ceiling the way Mitch McConnell has set it up. I realize that Republicans aren't going to vote for this. They might on the procedural vote here. But considering the remarks of the former president, who came down pretty hard on Mitch McConnell in recent weeks about this, I mean, what do you think about this? Did Mitch McConnell give up leverage, even though Republicans aren't going to actually cast a vote to lift the debt ceiling? They're going to just help in this procedural fashion?
Let's keep in mind the debt ceiling is in such a devastating position because Democrats have spent trillions of dollars this year already on things like day one, the $1.9 trillion spending bill that had nothing to do with COVID. It was about bailing out failed states, giving money to people, paying people not to work. In years past, and you can go back to when Donald Trump was president, there were three different budget cap, spending cap, and debt ceiling agreements that were reached, including between President Trump and Speaker Pelosi. And so you had a time when Republicans and Democrats worked together to determine what are the spending caps that we should have to control spending in Washington and deal with the debt that goes with it. That hasn't happened at all this year. Democrats have been on a reckless spending spree, trillions and trillions of dollars at a time, and not once have they sat down to work with Republicans to deal with the debt that they're racking up. And so, families know this every day, because if they're maxing out their credit card, they don't just go and apply for more and more credit cards and then send the bill to their kids. They sit down and figure out how to put a limit on spending. That hasn't happened in Washington. So the problem, whether you look at how the Senate's going to handle it, the real problem is that Democrats, from Joe Biden to Nancy Pelosi to Chuck Schumer, have not sat down with Republicans to have those same kind of agreements on how to limit spending. They don't want to limit spending. They want to keep spending more money, which shows you they haven't even paid attention to what voters said in states like Virginia, but also in New York and New Jersey. They want to get control over spending because families know the spending in Washington is driving inflation. So I wish they would do what President Trump did, and that is get a bipartisan deal to limit spending and deal with the debt ceiling.
Did McConnell give up leverage here?
Well, you can argue how the Senate's going to deal with it. The problem is Democrats refuse to admit that there's even a problem. We can talk about where the leverage is to fix it. The leverage would start by having Democrats admitting that there was a problem and being willing to work on it. They control everything right now. They have the House, they have the Senate, they have the White House. They've created this spending crisis and this debt crisis, and they refuse to even acknowledge it, let alone work to fix it. Yeah.
Scalise, this is a question for you and for Chair Stefanik. If the Republicans win back the House in 2022, as I'm sure you'd like to do, would you be in favor of having former President Trump as the House Speaker?
Well, first of all, we are not measuring drapes or figuring out who's going to have which titles. We're working to get the House back. Right now, we're working to save our country and limit the damage. And there's a lot of damage being done. But we're working very aggressively to recruit candidates. Obviously, raising money is a big part of that. We have a lot of those candidates in town today. We have phenomenal candidates, but we haven't won anything. Tom Emmer will be the first to tell you we're working to win the House back, and I think we've never had a better opportunity. But anybody who starts trying to measure the drapes or figure out where they're going to put the trophy usually doesn't get it because they're not focused on the right things. We're working on getting it back right now, and I'll let Elise answer as well.
Yeah, we do not measure the drapes. We are working to earn a historic majority from the American people. And look, the past November elections demonstrate that Democrats are losing the support of the American people, particularly Joe Biden, but Democrats across America, including the overwhelming wins by Republican candidates in New York State, whether it was some of the ballot initiatives, whether it was the suburbs. And as a member of leadership, it's been an honor to work beside Leader McCarthy and Whip Scalise, and I fully support their leadership if and when we earn back the majority.
Last question.
Yes, sir.
Congressman Scalise, do you believe that Representative Boebert's Islamophobic comments about Representative Omar were wrong?
Well, first of all, if you look at what Lauren Boebert said, she came back and apologized. And I do think this gets lost too often because we've had members on both sides that have said things that we disagree with. I don't know if I've seen a time where a Democrat's apologized for their statement. Lauren apologized for what she said. And the fact that on the Democrat side, they want to only go after Republicans. They don't even ask their own members to apologize for things that were said, let alone go after their members. They want it to be a one-sided thing, and I think that's I think that hypocrisy is showing. So let them call out what they see wrong as we do. But when a member apologizes, I think you ought to respect and appreciate that, and ultimately call for a higher standard. But it starts with the members themselves acknowledging if they said something that they shouldn't have, to come and apologize for it and then move on. So appreciate that.
Thanks.
All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us here at Golden State Times. If you're new to the channel, we encourage you to subscribe by clicking that middle button. Also, check out our previous video by clicking the video on the right, or a video you might enjoy by clicking the video on the left. Also, don't forget to click the thumbs up button and share this video on social media. Peace.